The year was 1979, and Richard Miller's life had grown painfully quiet. At 34, he carried the heavy stillness of a man who had once dreamed of a bustling household, but now came home to an echo. His wife, Anne, had been gone for 2 years. Cancer had taken her quickly, leaving behind only the hollow rooms of the house they once imagined filling with children's laughter. Richard worked long days at the factory, and every evening ended the same way, sitting alone at his kitchen table, staring at the cracked wallpaper, listening to the steady tick of the clock that seemed to mock him with each passing second. Friends urged him to remarry, to move on, to start over, but Richard resisted. Starting over felt like erasing Anne. He remembered the words she had whispered in her hospital bed, her hand frail in his. "Don't let love die with me. Give it somewhere to go." Those words lived in him like a promise carved into stone. But Richard didn't know where to send that love. He had no children, no clear path forward. All he had was his work, his quiet evenings, and the ache of a dream that had been cut short. To the neighbors, Richard was just a lonely widower clinging to memories. But inside, a part of him still longed for something bigger than grief, a chance to give meaning to Anne's words. He just didn't yet know how love would find its way back into his life. One rainy evening, fate intervened. Richard's old truck sputtered and died on the edge of the city, forcing him to seek shelter at the nearest building, a weathered brick orphanage called St. Mary's. He stepped inside, shaking the rain from his coat, intending only to use their phone. But before he found the office, a faint chorus of cries reached him from down a dim corridor. Drawn by the sound, he followed until he reached a small room where cribs were crammed tightly together. Inside them lay 9 infants, 9 tiny girls, all dark-skinned, with wide brown eyes and fragile arms reaching skyward. They were not crying in unison, but in a desperate, uneven chorus that pierced him deeper than any silence had. A young nurse, noticing his stunned expression, whispered, "They came together." Left on church steps in the middle of the night. No names, no note, just one blanket. Richard froze, struggling to comprehend it. 9. How could anyone abandon 9 babies? The nurse sighed. No one wants them. People come willing to take 1, maybe 2, but never all. They'll be separated eventually. That word, separated, stabbed through him. He thought of Anne's promise, of her belief that family wasn't about blood but choice. Looking at those tiny faces, something stirred in him, heavier than grief yet alive with responsibility. What if someone took all of them? He asked softly. The nurse almost laughed. All 9. Sir, no one can raise 9 babies. But Richard's mind was already made up. Richard's decision shook everyone around him. The social workers called it reckless, his relatives called him foolish, and the neighbors whispered behind curtains. "What's a white man doing with 9 black babies?" Some sneered. Others muttered darker things, but Richard didn't flinch. The paperwork dragged on for weeks, but he fought for every signature. He sold his truck, Anne's jewelry, even his tools. He begged for extra shifts at the factory, patched roofs on weekends, and took night work at a diner. Every dollar went to formula, diapers, and tiny cribs he built himself. The house that once echoed with silence transformed into a storm of chaos, crying at all hours, bottles boiling on the stove, diapers piled higher than laundry. Richard stumbled through exhaustion, yet each night he counted their breaths in the dark, making sure they were safe. He taught himself everything: how to braid hair with clumsy fingers, how to soothe them with lullabies, how to tell them apart by the different tones of their cries. He was ridiculed in grocery stores, stared at in the park. Once, a man spat at his feet and said, "You'll regret this." But regret never came. Instead, there were moments. The first time all nine laughed together, a sound so pure it shook the walls. The sight of them crawling in a line down the hallway like a living train. The quiet weight of nine tiny bodies asleep against him after a storm knocked out the power. As the years passed, each girl bloomed into her own rhythm. Sarah's laugh was the loudest in the house, infectious and bright. Ruth clung to Richard's shirt whenever strangers came near. Naomi and Esther became mischievous partners in crime, forever sneaking cookies from the counter. Leah was tender, always placing a gentle hand on her sister's shoulders when fights broke out. Mary, quiet but determined, was the first to walk. Hannah, Rachel, and little Deborah were inseparable, their games filling the house with endless chatter. Together, they became known around town as the Miller Nine. Some spoke the name with awe, others with suspicion. For Richard, it was simpler. They were his daughters. Life was never easy. Money was always scarce. He often skipped meals so the girls could have enough. He patched their clothes until the fabric thinned to threads. At night, when the house finally grew quiet, he sat at the kitchen table with bills stacked like enemies in front of him. His head would drop into his hands, but he never let the girls see despair. To them, he was steady and strong, even when he was tired and sore. They saw a father who always showed up with lunches packed, shoes saved for over weeks, and hair neatly braided before school. And amid the struggle there was grace. Homemade birthday cakes that collapsed in the middle, but were devoured anyway. Christmas mornings, when 9 pairs of hands tore open gifts wrapped in old newspaper. Summer nights under the stars, squeezed onto one blanket in the backyard as Richard told them stories about Anne, the mother they never knew, but who lived in every sacrifice he made. Slowly, against the odds, the girls grew, not just taller, but rooted. They held one another up when the world tried to tear them down. And always, they came home to Richard. Time, as it always does, moved quickly. By the late 1990s, Richard's hair had turned gray, his back bent with years of labor. The 9 little girls he once carried in his arms were now young women, stepping into the world with confidence. Sarah became a teacher, Ruth a nurse. Naomi and Esther pursued art, their work full of color and defiance. Leah studied social work, determined to give other children the chance she had been given. Mary's quiet strength carried her into law, while Hannah, Rachel, and Deborah remained inseparable even as they built their own careers and families. The world had doubted them all, yet here they were, thriving. They faced prejudice, questions, and suspicion, but they carried Richard's lessons with them. That love was not blood. That family was a choice. And that sacrifice could be the seed of something extraordinary. One by one, they left the house for college, for jobs, for marriages. The once chaotic home grew quieter with each departure, until at last Richard sat alone on the couch, staring at a framed photo of 9 toddlers lined up like pearls. That night, as silence wrapped around him again, he whispered into the still air, "I kept my promise, Anne." Decades later, the silence would be broken again. Now an old man, frail and thin, Richard sat in a grand armchair. Around him stood 9 women, no longer children, but radiant, confident, dressed in matching cream-colored dresses. Their arms draped around his shoulders, their faces pressed close, smiles blooming like flowers. Photographers snapped pictures. Headlines blazed. In 1979, he adopted 9 black girls. See them now. But Richard wasn't thinking of headlines. His eyes brimmed as he looked at the women who had once fit into the crook of his arms. Against all odds, they had grown, flourished, and stayed together. And for the first time in years, he let himself believe he had truly kept his promise. The reunion made news far beyond their small town. Reporters marveled at the miracle of a man who had once been ridiculed for a reckless choice, and the 9 daughters who had grown into women of strength and grace. To the world, it was a headline. To Richard, it was simply life, a promise fulfilled one day at a time. As cameras flashed, he drifted into memory. He saw Anne's face in the hospital bed, whispering her final plea. He remembered the whispers of neighbors who doubted him, the sting of prejudice that followed them in grocery aisles and schoolyards. He remembered the hunger in his own belly on nights when food had been scarce, and the aching weight of bills that threatened to drown him. But he also remembered the joy, the first laughter that rattled his house, the birthday cakes that collapsed but were devoured with glee, the nights when 9 little heads had leaned against his shoulders as he told them about the mother they never knew. Now those 9 were here, their hands on him, their love surrounding him like a shield. The doubts, the judgments, the ridicule, all had faded into irrelevance. What mattered was this: he had kept them together. They had become the family he and Anne once dreamed of, even if it had taken a path no one else could have imagined. As the celebration quieted, Grace, the eldest, leaned close to her father. Her voice trembled, but was steady enough for him to hear. "Dad, you did it. You kept us together." Richard's lips quivered into a smile. His voice, fragile yet firm, whispered back, "No, we did it. Love did it." The room fell silent. Each daughter leaned in, pressing close to the man who had chosen them when no one else would. 9 strong women encircled the frail frame of their father, their warmth wrapping around him like a living embrace. For 46 years, Richard had carried the promise Anne gave him. He had faced ridicule, exhaustion, and fear, yet never allowed his daughters to feel unwanted or unloved. Now, in the glow of their presence, he finally allowed himself to weep openly, not from despair, but from fulfillment. The promise had not only been kept, it had blossomed. The 9 babies no one wanted had grown into women admired by the world. The man everyone doubted had lived long enough to see them thrive. And for Richard Miller, that was enough. He had given love somewhere to go. And love, in turn, had carried him all the way home.